Sentences and clauses. Adjective clauses. Adjective clauses, also called relative clauses, have only a single function: to modify nouns. As with adverb clauses, adjective clauses begin with a distinctive flag word that signals the beginning of the clause. In the case of adjective clauses, the flag words are a special group of pronouns called relative pronouns. The list of relative pronouns is mercifully short: who, whom, whose, that, which. Here are examples of all 5 relative pronouns: adjective clauses in italics, relative pronouns in bold. The sportscaster who is on Channel 7 has never picked a winner yet. She married a man whom she had met at work. I contacted the person whose car I bumped into. I finally read the book that you told me about. We will use my car, which has a full tank of gas. Adjective clauses are relatively, pardon the pun, easy to identify for several reasons. First, there are only 5 relative pronouns to remember. Second, adjective clauses are locked into place immediately following the nouns they modify, so they can hide, but they can't run. Third, as you might expect, the third-person pronoun test provides a powerful tool for identifying adjective clauses. Here's the third-person pronoun test, slightly modified for adjective clauses. The third-person pronoun test for adjective clauses. If a noun and a following clause are both replaced by a single third-person pronoun, then that clause must be an adjective clause modifying that noun. Following is the third-person pronoun test applied to the 5 examples from above. The sportscaster who is on Channel 7 has never picked a winner yet. He, she has never picked a winner yet. She married a man whom she had met at work. She married him. I contacted the person whose car I bumped into. I contacted him, her. I finally read the book that you told me about. I finally read it. I finally read the book which you told me about. I finally read it. Adjective clauses are not built the same way that adverb clauses are. In adverb clauses, the flag words that introduce adverb clauses are subordinating conjunctions. The subordinating conjunctions are followed by bound independent clauses. The subordinating conjunctions are in front of and outside the bound independent clauses. In adjective clauses, however, the relative pronouns are inside and part of the bound independent clauses. In the first example, the sportscaster who is on Channel 7 has never picked a winner yet. The relative pronoun who is the subject of the verb is inside the adjective clause. In the second example, she married a man whom she had met at work. The relative pronoun whom is the object of the verb met inside the adjective clause. Adjective clauses have one feature that can make them a little more difficult to recognize. Under certain circumstances, described a little later, the relative pronoun that begins an adjective clause can be deleted. The role that the relative pronoun plays inside the adjective clause governs when a relative pronoun may or may not be deleted. We can see the differences in roles most easily in the who, whom, whose family of relative pronouns. Who equals the subject of the adjective clause. Whom equals an object of the verb or of a preposition in the adjective clause. Whose equals a possessive pronoun modifying the noun that follows it in the adjective clause. Here are some further examples of the uses of who, whom, whose with commentary on the roles of the relative pronouns. Relative clauses in italics. Relative pronouns in bold. Who. I met with the real estate agent who sold us our house. Who is the subject of the verb sold in the adjective clause? The woman who introduced herself is my sister-in-law. Who is the subject of the verb introduced in the adjective clause? Whom. I met with the real estate agent whom you recommended. Whom is the object of the verb recommended. The woman whom you asked me about is my sister-in-law. Whom is the object of the preposition about. Whose. The umpire mentioned to the player whose helmet had come off. Whose is a possessive modifying the noun helmet. The driver whose turn was next drove onto the ramp. Whose is a possessive modifying the noun turn. The basic rule of relative pronoun deletion is this. Only relative pronouns playing the roles of objects can be deleted. Relative pronouns playing the other roles of subjects or possessives cannot be deleted. Here are examples of valid deletion involving whom. Whom. I met with the real estate agent whom you recommended. Whom is retained. I met with the real estate agent you recommended. Whom is deleted. Whom. The woman whom you asked me about is my sister-in-law. Whom is retained. The woman you asked me about is my sister-in-law. Whom is deleted. The deletion of whom seems perfectly routine. In conversation, we may actually prefer to delete the whom because whom may sound a little stuffy or overly formal. Now let's see what happens when we try to delete who and whose. Who. I met with the real estate agent who sold us our house. Who is retained. I met with the real estate agent, sold us our house. Who is deleted. The woman who introduced herself is my sister-in-law. Who is retained. The woman introduced herself as my sister-in-law. Who is deleted. Whose. The umpire mentioned to those players whose helmet had come off. Who is retained. The umpire mentioned to the player helmet had come off. Whose is deleted. The driver whose turn was next drove onto the ramp. Whose is retained. The driver turn was next drove onto the ramp. Who is deleted. As you can see, the deletion of who and whose creates completely ungrammatical sentences. That in which the two remaining relative pronouns are a little harder to work with because, unlike who and whom, they do not have endings that tell us whether they are being used as subjects or objects. Nevertheless, they follow the same basic rules about deletion. If they play the role of object, they may be deleted. However, if they play the role of subject, they cannot be deleted. Here are some examples of that and which playing both roles. Adjective clauses in italics, that and which in bold. Subject. The car that was left in the left lane suddenly put on its brakes. Barney's car, which was in the left lane, suddenly put on its brakes. When we attempt to delete that and which, the results are predictably ungrammatical because that and which are the subjects of the verb was. The car was in the left lane suddenly put on its brakes. Object. The car that I was driving got a flat tire. My son's car, which I was driving, got a flat tire. As expected, that and which may be deleted because they are objects of the verb driving. The car I was driving got a flat tire. My son's car I was driving got a flat tire. Restrictive and non-restricted adjective relative clauses. Adjective clauses come in two flavors, restrictive and non-restrictive. As the name restrictive implies, adjectives have the power to restrict or limit the meaning of the nouns they modify. Here is an example from above of an adjective clause used restrictively. The car that I was driving got a flat tire. A major part of the function of the adjective clause that I was driving is to identify which car got a flat tire. It was the car that I was driving as opposed to the car that somebody else was driving. Adjective clauses that play this defining or restricting role are called, not surprisingly, restrictive clauses. Non-restrictive adjective clauses, conversely, do not have this defining function. Non-restrictive adjective clauses give information that can be interesting or even highly significant, but the information does not serve to define which noun it is that we are talking about. Here is an example of a sentence containing a non-restrictive adjective clause in italics. My Uncle Harry, who is an absolute loony, always overstays his welcome. Now, my Uncle Harry would still be my Uncle Harry even if he were not an absolute loony. In other words, the information in the adjective clause, interesting as it is, does not serve to tell us which Uncle Harry we are talking about. I only have one Uncle Harry. The fact that he is an absolute loony does not serve to distinguish one Uncle Harry from another. Therefore, the adjective clause is non-restrictive. The distinction between restrictive and non-restrictive clauses affects the choice between that and which. In non-restrictive clauses, which is nearly always used now instead of that, though this was not always the case, for example, compare the following uses of which and that in a non-restrictive clause. Notice how strange the use of that sounds. Our house, which we just repainted, was damaged in the storm. Our house that we just repainted was damaged in the storm. In restrictive clauses, the matter is not so clear-cut. Historically, that and which were always used interchangeably, as in the following quote from the Authorized King James Version of the Bible, 1611. Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. However, the increasingly strong preference for which in non-restrictive clauses led commentators at the end of the 19th century to advocate using that in restrictive clauses so that restrictive and non-restrictive clauses would be consistently marked. That in restrictive clauses and which in non-restrictive clauses. Most style sheets and editors, including the editors of this book, strongly recommend using only that in restrictive clauses. In fact, many published writers use which in restrictive clauses. One study found that fully 25% of the uses of which in edited, published writings are used to introduce restrictive clauses. Bottom line, because the folks who use both that and which in restrictive clauses don't care which you use, you might as well use only that in restrictive clauses to make happy the folks who do care, often deeply. We distinguish restrictive and non-restrictive clauses in writing by putting commas around the non-restrictive ones. The trick, of course, is knowing when adjective clauses are non-restrictive. The section, Commas with Adjective Clauses in Chapter 11, deals with this problem in detail. Noun clauses. Noun clauses are the most complicated and sophisticated of the three types of clauses. Children learn to use noun clauses substantially later than the other two types of clauses. Abstract and technical writing abounds in noun clauses. Noun clauses gives us the ability to take a whole sentence and compact it down into a unit that we can use as a subject or an object in the independent clause. Noun clauses are a bit of a double-edged sword. The ability to use noun clauses is one of the hallmarks of sophisticated writing. However, overuse of noun clauses leads to laden, deadly, dull writing. Think of textbooks in education. A noun clause is a dependent clause used as a noun phrase. Noun clauses can play the basic noun phrase roles of subject, object of verbs, object of prepositions, and predicate nominative. For example, noun clauses in italics. Subject. What he does for a living is a big mystery. Object of verb. I know that you are right. Object of preposition. We were aware of what we needed to do. Predicate nominative. This is what we wanted. Because noun clauses always play the role of noun phrases, they can be identified the same way that noun phrases are, by the third person pronoun test. Noun clauses have another property that we can take advantage of. They are always singular. This means that we can always replace noun clauses with singular third person pronouns. Furthermore, because noun clauses are always a kind of abstraction, we can replace them with the pronoun it. Here is the third person pronoun test modified for noun clauses. The it test for noun clauses. If a clause can be replaced by the pronoun it, then the clause is a noun clause. Following is the it test applied to the four preceding example sentences. Subject. What he does for a living is a big mystery. It is a big mystery. Object of verb. I know that you are right. I know it. Object of preposition. We were aware of what we needed to do. We were aware of it. Predicate nominative. This is what we wanted. This is it. Noun clauses, like the other two types of clauses, have flag words that signal the beginning of the clause. Noun clauses are a bit different from the other two types of clauses in that there are two different sets of flag words, creating two slightly different kinds of noun clauses. Strangely enough, neither set of flag words has a conventional name in traditional grammar. In many modern grammar books, they are called that type and what type, for reasons that will soon become apparent. Accordingly, the two different types of noun clauses are called that type noun clauses and what type noun clauses. The two different groups of noun clauses behave the same way, but how the two types of clauses are constructed is different. In that type noun clauses, the flag word is outside the bound, independent clause, as in adverb clauses. In what type noun clauses the flag word is inside the bound independent clause as in adjective clauses? For this reason, we will discuss the two groups separately. Grammar trivia, plurals and generalizations. Not all plural forms of nouns deal merely with the number or amount of something. We often use them to make generalizations. Example, airports are getting more crowded. The plural airports makes a generalization about all airports, not just the number of specific airports. Likewise, the plural cell phones makes a generalization about an entire category of devices. For many people, cell phones are a necessity. That type noun clauses. By far, the most common flag word in this group is that. The other three are if, whether, and whether or not. Here are examples of that type noun clauses playing all four noun phrase roles. Noun clauses in italics. Flag words in bold. Subject. Whether or not it rains will determine our destination. Object of verb. We wondered if we should go to the party. Object of preposition. We couldn't decide about whether we should leave. Predicate nominative. The plan is that we will reconvene after lunch. The type noun clauses are built like adverb clauses in that the flag word is put in front of a bound independent clause and the flag word plays no grammatical role inside the bound independent clause. That type noun clause equals that type flag word plus bound independent clause. The flag word if poses a special problem. Noun clauses beginning with if are easily confused with adverb clauses, which can also begin with if. Here are a pair of examples of the two different kinds of clauses, both beginning with if. Clauses in italics, flag words in bold. Noun clause. I don't know if I can come. Adverb clause. I will meet you there if I can come. As you can see, these two if clauses are absolutely identical in wording. What is not identical is their relationship to the independent clause. Fortunately, we have reliable tests for both types of clauses that clearly show the differences between the use of the if clauses in the two sentences. For noun clauses, we have the third person pronoun test. Noun clause, I don't know if I can come. Third person pronoun test, I don't know if I can come. I don't know it. When we apply the third person pronoun test to the adverb clause, the result is ungrammatical because the it is replacing an adverb clause, not a noun clause. I will meet you there if I can come. I will meet you there, it. Conversely, when we apply the adverb clause movement test to both sentences, the noun clause fails and the adverb clause passes. Noun clause, I don't know if I can come. Adverb clause movement test, if I can come, I don't know. As we would expect, the adverb clause moves quite naturally. Adverb clause, I will meet you there if I can come. Adverb clause movement test, if I can come, I will meet you there. WH type noun clauses. WH type noun clauses got their peculiar name from the fact that nearly all the flag words happen to begin with the letters WH. Words are unique among flag words in that they belong to different parts of speech. Here are the most common words classified by their parts of speech. Notice that many of the words can be compounded with ever. Nouns: what, whom, whatever, whoever, whomever. Adjective: whose, which, whichever. Adverbs: when, where, why, how, whenever, wherever, however. The last two words on this list, how and however, do not actually begin with WH. We will treat them as honorary members of the WH family. The following is a set of type noun clauses in the four main noun roles. Noun clauses in italics, words in bold. Subject: whatever you decide is fine with us. Object of verb: I know where we can get a good pizza. Object of preposition: we were aware of which choices were open to us. Predicate nominative: the situation is what we expected it would be.